Hello, my name is Brock, and today I will be going over Standard Terminal Arrival Routes, or STARS as they're more commonly known. Now, the first thing to note about STARS is that they are an easy way for air traffic control to transition aircraft from the en route structure into the final approach course to the airport. In this case, this is the KALA 3 arrival into St. Louis Lambert International, St. Louis, Missouri. Now, in order to find the STARS, you will need to look in the U.S. Terminal Procedures publication along with the instrument approach procedures and the departure procedures. They're all in there. Now, there are a couple different kinds of STARS. The first, what you see here in front of you, is a graphical STAR. This basically shows the route on a map. So if we were coming from the Springfield VOR, it shows you all your fixes and waypoints in order to get you into the airport, St. Louis. This gives you where they are, the distances, what waypoints there are, any altitude or speed restrictions, and so on, all the way to your initial approach fix into your final approach into the airport. The second kind of STAR would be a graphical STAR. This is essentially the same thing as a textual STAR. This is essentially the same thing as a graphical STAR, except instead of having it on a map like that one was all the way into the airport, it's written out in words. So from the KALA waypoint to Big Mac and thence whatever runway you want to land on. For example, if you're landing to the south on 2930 left, or 30 left or right, then you will follow all these instructions. They give you the fixes, the course, altitudes, and speeds, all the way into flood, which is the last on the graphical STAR, and then they tell you to expect radar vectors to final approach course. Now, as you can see here, this is what is known as an RNAV STAR. So, RNAV here. So, as you can see, it says you need to use a suitable RNAV system. So, one of these systems, or what's more commonly used, is GPS. And in order to fly this approach, because it is an RNAV STAR, all public RNAV STARs are what is called RNAV1, which means that in order to fly the approach, your GPS system has to keep you within plus or minus 1 mile, 1 nautical mile, 95% of the time. So keep you on the center line of your route, because that's where air traffic control expects you to be. Now, there are a couple different elements of the STAR. The first one is the lateral navigation. This is just the your route. So 44 degrees from the Springfield VOR, 57 to Juxav to Zelmo, and it gives you what waypoints you are supposed to follow on your route into the airport. And these begin at a transition fix. So the Springfield VOR, you would file to the Springfield VOR and then follow your route, and it usually terminates at flood. Well, it usually terminates at an initial approach fix. In this case, flood is the initial approach fix to the runways, and as you could see on the textual version here, if final approach clearance is not received by flood, then continue on track 124 and expect radar vectors to the final approach course. So in order to get you out of the STAR and onto the airport. The second part of a STAR is the vertical navigation. So as you're transitioning from the Springfield VOR to GNON, so say you're starting out as, since this is for turbojet aircraft only, starting out at, say, flight level 35, 35,000 feet. So you would continue along your route and then cross Jeksev below flight level 310. From there, you would continue on to Zolmo below 23,000 feet. On to Kayla, you want to stay at or above 11,000. Continuing on, cross Gibby between 15,000 and 11,000. Aussie between 10,000 and 11,000. 8,000 and 9,000. Hoot, Pija, and then ultimately cross Flood at 5,000 feet. Now it is important to note that these altitudes are not mandatory unless ATC gives them to you verbally or tells you to follow them. And they do this by giving you a descend via clearance. So if you are told to descend via the Kayla 3 arrival, then they will expect you to fly your approach, or fly the star, and cross all these altitude restrictions where they're listed. The third part of the star is the speed restrictions. They are listed next to the altitudes, and they tell you what speed you have to cross that waypoint at. For example, coming from Springfield, they expect you to slow down and cross Jeksev at 280 knots. From there, you continue on, and they expect you to cross Hoot at 210 knots. And from there, or if you were going north, go up to Elbert at 240 knots. Now, unlike the altitude restrictions, the speed restrictions are mandatory. They expect you to cross Jeksev at 280 knots, of course, if you're able. In the Skyhawk, that would be fairly difficult. So they do this in order to manage the planes coming into St. Louis Lambert International. They want to be able to space them out well so that they don't get too close, and in order to do that, they give you mandatory speeds in order to maintain that separation. Now, there are a couple of different clearances that they can give you. For example, the general would be the cleared for the Kayla 3 arrival, and that's it. So in this case, you would only follow the lateral navigation. You would not pay attention to these, to the altitudes, sorry. You do pay attention to the speeds, not the altitudes. The second version would be if they tell you to descend via the Kayla 3 arrival. As I said, at that point, then you do follow both the speed and the altitude restrictions. Now, they can also change what's written on these stars. So, for example, if they told you you are cleared to descend via the Kayla 3 arrival, except cross NATIM at flight level 200. So you would begin at the Napoleon VOR, do everything normally, flight level 310, 280 knots, except here at NATIM, instead of crossing at 220 or flight level 230, you would cross at flight level 200. And then from there, you would continue, then cross Kayla above 11,000, so on and so forth. They can also tell you, in the same way, to cross NATIM at 240 knots. In this case, again, you would do the same thing, come down from the Napoleon VOR, 280 knots below 310 at Hevna, Coop, and then at NATIM, you would cross below flight level 230, except they want you to slow down a bit more to 240 knots. Now, you can plan to use a star and file a star in your flight plan. In order to do this, you see up here, it says Kayla.Kayla3. This would be if you're coming from anywhere else, say direct to the Kayla waypoint, and then from there you want to follow the star. Another way, if you want to use one of these transition routes onto this star, you would use the identifier. For example, if you were starting at Springfield, it would be sgf.kayla 3. And that's how you would put it into the computer system, and it would know what you want. Now, another thing you can do is request no star. So if you put this in the remarks section, then ATC will know that you would prefer to not use a star. However, remember that this is only a request, and they can still give you a star if they wish. So it's always important to carry them with you, because if you do not have it with you, you would tell ATC you cannot accept the star, and at that point they may give you all these fixes to program in to your GPS over the radio. So cleared direct to the Springfield VOR, to GNON, JEXAV, Zolmo, and they could even give you all the altitudes and speeds. So always carry it with you. So in conclusion, stars are an easy way for air traffic control to get you from the en route environment up in the flight levels all the way in to the airport and finally onto the ground. I would like to thank you all for watching my short lesson on stars.